Hi, my name is Marcy Berger, and I'm the Member Services Coordinator at APSA. Welcome to Overcoming Consumer Security Concerns to Drive Digital Bill Payment Adoption. This presentation is a part of APSA's Business Partner Webinar Series, which allows industry experts to share timely educational topics directly with APSA members. For more information about the series or how to become a presenter, feel free to reach out to me following today's webinar. A few housekeeping notes. To ask a question, use the question box on the side of your screen. The slides and recording of today's webinar will be available later today on APSA's website in the Webinar Resource Center. Finally, you'll receive a survey after the webinar is over. Please take a moment to complete it. Your responses help us fine-tune the program so we can target the issues that are important to you. A bit about our presenters. Gene Scriven is a cybersecurity veteran with more than 4 decades of information security and data protection experience across a wide spectrum of industries. He has provided security solutions to Fortune 500 firms as a specialized security consultant, addressed the security requirements of the U.S. government and various intelligence agencies as a military officer and government contractor, and has owned the problem as an associate of commercial organizations. Gene's background includes being the Chief Information Security Officer at Cyber Corporation and the Home Depot, and currently he is the head of the Global Information and Corporate Security at ACI. Our other presenter, Tom Donovan, is a senior solution consultant who joined ACI Worldwide in early 2019 as part of Speedpay and Walletron acquisition. Based in Philadelphia, Tom spent the first 5 years of his career as a Java developer before transitioning to a product team master and sales engineer. Most recently, before joining ACI, he was at Walletron's Director of Implementation. Tom now leads the solutions consulting efforts of the consumer finance vertical within ACI's Biller division. Outside of work, Tom enjoys playing ice hockey, drone photography, and traveling to attend as many college football games as possible. Now I'll turn it over to you. Thank you, Tom and Gene.
Thank you so much. So here you see, oh, can we go to the next slide there? There we go. Thank you. Cool. So hello, everyone, again, and thank you for joining. So here we see the agenda for today's meeting. So we're going to start with consumer payment insecurity. Then we're going to move on to what companies aren't doing about security, as well as what they can be doing about security. We'll provide you a little bit of an overview about us and how we handle security in our various product efforts. And then lastly, we'll open it up for some Q&A towards the end of the session. Great. So thank you. You'll see many of the slides that we present today will be referencing our 2021 ACI Speedpay Pulse study. And we surveyed a few thousand respondents about all different aspects of the payment landscape. And all of the pieces that you'll see today focus on security. So as part of our past 2 years of Speedpay Pulse studies, we asked consumers if they believe that their data is more secure than it was 5 years ago. So 2021's response to this question showed a 4% drop over the same question asked in 2020. I think you might have to advance it one, please. Oh, there we go. And then in addition to that, when we break that down by age group, you'll see here that it is the older generations that do not feel as strongly about this as the younger ones, especially because they're less tech savvy. Okay. And I'll pass it over to Gene to talk about what's driving that lack of confidence.
Yeah, thank you. So Tom, I object to the older generation statement. I'll tell you that photo on the second slide, somebody did me very well. I've been doing this for 5 decades now, so appreciate the photo there. So, you know, Tom just talked about people lacking confidence in security and in other things. And what causes you to lose confidence in something? Well, it's when somebody doesn't do something right and there's some kind of a loss. I don't know about the rest of you, but I spent a lot of time standing in line trying to get gas when the recent major, gas line was piped. So Colonial Pipeline ended up with, as everybody well knows because it was all over the news, a breach of their organization. And it happened to be a ransomware breach, which means someone broke in and captured their files and held them for ransom and wanted them to pay for them to get them back. The reason that this happened was that multi-factor authentication, so something other than just an ID and a password, which by the way is a security best practice now, was not in place. And the problem is compounded not because it was a simple matter of using an ID and a password to get in, but because the account that was compromised by the bad guys had actually not been needed. It was an employee that no longer needed the account. So failures on 2 points there. One is they weren't regularly reviewing active accounts, and secondly, they weren't using, as expected, multi-factor authentication. And that's just one example. Same thing, a couple of weeks later, JBS, which was, world's largest meat supplier, had the same type of a situation. They had a ransomware attack. The cause or the attack vector for that particular attack is still up for discussion. There are many that believe that it was actually a phishing message that an employee was hooked with that provided credentials to be provided to let the bad guys in. Either way, in both of these situations, it was a multi-million-dollar ransom to get the information back. And we can probably have discussion later if needed, but in this case, both companies opted to pay that ransom. Now, there's discussion amongst the industry as to whether that's the right thing to do or not. Everybody's got their personal opinion. But interestingly, these are two of the major things that have happened recently that have been on the news that helps talk about why people have, lost confidence in a lot of different companies and a lot of things that they do. So if we go to the next slide, please. In addition to just, security issues throughout, identity theft is something that probably touches everybody here. And as you see, just over the course of a year, there's been almost a 50% increase in identity theft. And I would argue, having been an individual that investigated some of this in a previous life, that the number is actually significantly higher than that. You have a lot of people that will not report this because they're embarrassed about it, and you have a lot more people that won't report it, quite frankly, because they're not aware of it. Oftentimes, identity theft happens, and again, the victims aren't aware of it until it's far too late to do anything about it. If we go to the next slide, please. And as we're talking about identity theft, let's get specifically into where we see this happening. And you'll get different statistics from different sources, but this is generally pretty accurate. Now, what we talk about here is, when you're applying for an auto loan or a lease or something like that, there's an 88% increase in identity theft of people that are attempting to do that with your name or with your spouse's name, or quite frankly, with your child's name. We see a significant amount of identity theft happening with children because guess what? They have social security numbers, and it's just possible, and the bad guys have figured out how to do that. Business and personal identity theft, we see up 127%. I originally questioned this number on this slide when we put this together, but went out and researched it, and yes, there has been a 29-fold increase in government benefits identity theft. I recently moved from the ACI headquarters office in Florida to one of our offices here in Georgia. And I'll tell you that within the last year, there have been 2 identity theft issues that involve me. And they happen to be government benefits. In both cases, unemployment benefits were filed in my name against my social security number, both in Florida and then in Georgia after I arrived here. So, I have, as you can imagine, all kinds of monitoring on my accounts. I picked up on it before anything happened and was able to stop it. But it's just indicative of the fact that, a lot of this stuff is happening, and it's one of the reasons that people are losing confidence in the things that happen today. So we'll go to the next slide. I'll turn it over to Tom.
Cool. Thanks, Gene. So here we show the past we're going to show the past 3 years of questions that we asked in the respondents in the survey, asking them if they had ever been a victim of online identity theft. So let's pull up the first graph here on the left. And here we see that there's been a fairly stable rate year over year. However, with more high-profile, pretty mass-scale security breaches occurring these days, they're always on the news. And one I can point to from the past week was T-Mobile. They had 40 million customers that had their data leaked, and that's just one example. We can think back to some of the credit bureaus that experienced big data leaks over the past few years as well. We do expect this number to rise. So let's pull up the graph on the right-hand side here. You'll see that the age breakdown shows here that younger people haven't experienced identity theft at the rates that older generations have. And this is likely due to a number of factors. So first, younger people typically are more tech savvy and therefore typically less likely to be duped by phishing scams or other common online scammers. In addition to that, younger people have less of an online history that there is to be leaked or hacked. So people in the older generations have had more of their data out there on the web for longer, especially during times that were less secure. And that's why we do see those higher rates for those older generations. Next slide, please. So next we asked consumers about their passwords. And we'll ask you a question in just a moment about how you manage your passwords. But first here, let's pull up the graph on the left. And when asked how often customers write down their passwords on paper, and hopefully they're not sticking these pieces of paper to the bottom of their computer monitor or anything like I've seen people do in the past, again, we see here that the oldest generation has unsurprisingly taken the more old school approach to managing their passwords. Whereas the younger generation, they have written them down on paper far less. Maybe they're using password managers. Maybe they're using autofill as part of their browser, which is its own password manager. For the next chart, I'll turn it over to Gene.
Thank you. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. I'm I'm in a different place here and having problems with the laptop. So, we have a lot of issues with people around passwords, and as Tom just pointed out, some of those basic issues are, that people will write them down. Or, for example, you'll only change your password when you're prompted to by the actual biller. I won't identify which it is, but I've got an online bank. I've got several banks, but I've got an online banking application that is never requiring me to change the password. And the problem with that is, passwords are like everything else. The longer they're out there, the better chance there is of them potentially being compromised. And a lot of the bad guys that do things, and I used to run teams of people to do this, a lot of the bad guys that do things rely on the fact that perhaps a password hasn't been changed in a year. And they can do something that we call brute force it, which is they continue to try to guess that password. And the longer it's out there unchanged, the better chance they have of potentially successfully brute forcing that password. So that's one of the problems that we see quite often. While we're talking passwords, I want to call out that some of the more significant issues that we see are, people using easy to guess passwords. I can't see the people on this call, but if we were doing this live, I would ask you to raise your hand if your password today is something that could be easily guessed, like spring 2020 or winter 2019 or Dallas Cowboys or something like that. And you'd be surprised as we go through these exercises how many people we find that use easy to guess passwords. And in many cases, your password is the only thing protecting you from the bad guys. So we encourage people to pick really difficult passwords. And then the other issue that we have is a lot of times software packages come with a default password. And that default password might be password, it might be user, it might be your name, it might be something simple like that. And when folks aren't changing these default passwords, again, you make it easy for the bad guys. So just a couple of things to think about as we talk about passwords and ways to properly store and secure those passwords. Again, don't use easy to guess passwords. Don't use the same password for multiple accounts, and don't stick with the default passwords. So Tom, I'll turn it back over to you. I think we probably have a survey question coming up, right?
That's right. Thank you, Gene. So, on the topic of passwords, one of the best ways to manage passwords is by using a password manager. So we have a survey question up here, and we'd like each of you to respond here. So we are asking you, which password manager do you use? Do you use LastPass? Do you use KeePass? do you use your browser's autofill feature? Do you use some other password manager, maybe something like 1Password? Or do you not use any password manager at all? So we'll wait a few seconds here for the responses to roll in. And once we get up, there we go. So we see here from the responses that it looks like about a third of us here on the call rely on the autofill features of our browser. And these are certainly handy. I think many of us rely on these in some manner. However, we do have 23% of us that use either LastPass or KeePass. And then I would also assume that the 23% listed as other, that a lot of that is probably 1Password or another manager. So in total here, just a little less than half of us, it appears, do use a password manager. And for the half that do, that's great. For the half that doesn't, or just relies on the autofill feature, we strongly recommend using a password manager. Next slide, back over to Gene.
Thanks, Tom. So we, rather than going through a long list of things that companies should do to make sure that they're securely protecting everyone's data, we thought we'd take a little bit of a different perspective and talk to you about some of the things that companies are not doing to make sure that the data is properly protected. So, there are a lot of things involved in building a good security program and protecting data. And some of the things that I'm going to talk about here, there are 4 particular measures that will help to protect data. And if we can hit that slide one more time, it'll populate that fourth item there. So what I'm going to talk about is just table stakes, if you will, to be able to protect data. And I'll start at the top. Companies need to be restricting access to data on a need-to-know basis. And that's very important because the information that needs to be protected within the environment doesn't need to be accessed by everybody. If we've got customer data in our environment, there's no reason that an HR person from within the company should have access to that. So what companies need to do is restrict that data, and they need to regularly review and make sure that as you change jobs, as you leave the company, as you do other things, that the access that you have to data and information is consistent with the job that you're being asked to do. I'll go clockwise here. Companies talk about, or we should be talking about, the fact that we always encrypt sensitive data. Not only do you have PII and PCI requirements to do this kind of stuff, but it's a best security practice. We see so much information being lost over time based upon the fact that the data isn't being encrypted. Now, there's 2 ways to do this. One way is if I set up a channel between myself and the person I'm communicating with and make sure that that channel is hardened, that helps to protect the information. The other thing that I can do is within that channel, I can encrypt that data so that even if the bad guys happen to tap into the channel and they pick up the data, or they find the data somewhere on a thumb drive or something else like that, it's useless to them. They cannot decrypt that data. It's just a bunch of hieroglyphics, for lack of a better word. We talked about this when we were talking about individual passwords, but companies ought to have a program that makes sure that any vendor supplied passwords are hardened or are changed when they stand up a device. We have something in my industry, we call it hardening. And what happens is when you open up a new device and put it on your network or a new server or a new database, you go through a hardening process. And that tells you all the things you do to make that device more secure. And one of the basic instrumental things that you do is make sure that the passwords that came with that are changed. I tell stories of how I've lived in many different places. And long ago, it was interesting to sit in an apartment complex or sit at an airport and realize how many people had default passwords on their routers and on their laptops, and how easy it is to look at what's happening on their machines. And then the last thing, although it's not the last, it's the last that we're talking about here, is you can have the best systems in the world, but if you don't test them, you never find out, and you're not confident that they stay that way. The Romans were kind of popular for this. They would send guys out into the woods, and they would use different techniques to try to penetrate the walls of the fortresses. And we do that today with electronic penetration testing, but there needs to be a way to make sure that you regularly test what it is that you have in place to protect data. And a lot of companies aren't doing these. And if you'll hit the slide one more time, please, what we realize is that when you look at these 4 very basic security measures that all companies should have in place, only about 9 or 10% of all the companies that we're aware of are actually doing all of these things. So again, this is a discussion a little bit backwards about what companies are not doing, and this tells you that 90 to 91% of the companies are not doing all 4 of these basic requirements to make sure that the data is being protected. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So we talk a lot about regulatory compliance, and we talk a lot about things that need to be done. What this slide articulates is that over the years, PCI compliance, and again, this is credit card processing, storing, transmitting, and regulations that you have to comply with. Significant number of companies are no longer playing that PCI compliance role. And I'll be honest with you, I've been doing this for a long, long time. PCI compliance can be a very, very hard thing to do. Depending upon your program, it can also be something very easy to do. But there are a significant number of requirements, I think 238 in the last version of the PCI standards. And you have to comply with all of those in order to be PCI compliant. And again, there are a lot of companies, and I run into these as we do business at our company, that have decided they don't want to go through this anymore. It's expensive, it's time consuming, it's kind of hard to do. And I'll share with you, there's a new version of the PCI standards coming out within the next year or 18 months or so. It's going to be PCI version 4. We've had a peek at that, and there are some extremely enhanced requirements that are coming out in that version of PCI. They deal with things like encryption levels. They deal with the fact that multi-factor authentication, more than just an ID and a password, has to be in place in many, many areas in the environment. So my prediction is, as version 4 comes out, we'll see even more companies that want to drop out of the PCI compliance situation. And that makes it difficult, because I personally wouldn't want to entrust my credit card information to a company that hasn't been certified that they know how to handle it. So at this point, and I'm sorry, I've got 2 different slides on 2 different screens here, but at this point, one of the things that we also want to talk about is, particularly given COVID, particularly given the fact that everybody is working from home now, is how to deal with the remote workforce challenges and the things that we've seen. And I know at our company, we had a significant amount of people that were working remotely anyway. But as it turns out, a significant amount of people that were in the office every day are now working from home for obvious reasons. Industry-wise, there's a close to 80% increase in people that are working remotely or working from home or working from somewhere else. What I have seen, both at our company and at other companies that I do work for, is a huge increase in the phishing attempts. And if you think about it, if the bad guys know that everybody's working from home now, what better way to lure somebody in and get them to, provide information? And that's to send them phishing messages. And they take advantage of the fact that people are working from home. I'll share with you, we've had phishing messages that we've caught at our company that are from our fake CEO or our fake, chief financial officer to different employees, asking them for information that you wouldn't normally provide to somebody. But the bad guys know that you're working from home. You can't just walk down the hall to find out if somebody's asking you the question. And you're usually, wanting to answer those questions very, very quickly. So they take advantage of that. And then the other thing that we see often with remote workforces, and this ends up being a problem, is, when you're working from home, that laptop or that computer that you have should be dedicated solely to the work that you're doing for your company. But unfortunately, I've seen over the years many, many people that allow family members, friends, and others to use their computer because, hey, your company issues you a real high-powered computer. I'll share with you that at other companies or investigations I've done over the past, we've looked into causes for breaches, and more than once I've seen it be a situation where a remote employee allowed a family member to play online gaming, Fortnite or Doom or something on their work computer. And in the course of doing that, opened up an attack vector that was used to get into a company. So again, just some things that companies need to think about, some things that aren't happening, and particularly given the fact that we've got a significant remote workforce now. Just, again, some things to think about. So Tom, I'll turn it back over to you to talk about contact centers.
Thank you, Gene. So here we show some statistics that we pulled from the U.S. State of Data Security in Contact Centers report, which was published in 2019. With many call centers having all of their agents forced to now work from home, security becomes a huge issue because now that company, that client, is unable to at least secure the work environment, right? So they could be, sitting at home and jotting down people's credit card numbers as they are read to them over the phone while a customer is trying to make a payment. Or with working remotely, you might not have the same kind of security software on the machine that the agent is using, which could mean that the agent would be able to go get some of the customers' social security numbers or their payment card information, even when they're not on the phone with that customer. This survey also found that 42% of agents who were asked to access or share customers' payment card information did not report the situation as they should have according to stated protocols. So all of this becomes significantly more difficult to manage in an entirely remote environment like the one that we've had over the past 18 months or so. Next slide, please. So this question here is from Verizon's Mobile Security Index, which was a study that was published this year. And we asked, Verizon asked their respondents how they handle security compromises, as well as do they ever sacrifice security to get the job done. So what we see here is that just 3 years ago, only 1/3 of respondents indicated that they had ever sacrificed security to get the job done. However, in 2021, that number is all the way up to 45%. And keep in mind that this is only the people that are admitting to it in a survey that was given to them where they were told that their responses would be anonymous. So we do suspect that the true value of these numbers could be even higher, potentially substantially higher, due to reporting bias. But it really shows that with all the stress and work that needs to be done in this fast-paced environment, many people are sacrificing security to get that done, and that could come back to bite them.
Tom, if I can piggyback on your discussion there, I'm sure that there are people in the audience that are asking, what do we mean sacrificing security to get the job done? And let me give you one example. In today's world, particularly with the people that we're hiring now in our companies, everybody wants to use their own device to access the network, whether it's an iPad or a laptop or a tablet or whatever the case might be. They want to use their own device. And in many cases, there are good reasons for that to happen. The problem is when people are using their own devices, it opens up, again, a massive attack vector for the bad guys to get into a network and an environment. And oftentimes, people don't concern themselves, companies don't concern themselves with how to protect against that. There's a technology that's known as mobile device management. We call it MDM just to cut down on words. And what that is it's a solution that you bring in that helps you manage mobile devices in a secure way while you allow them on their network. When we're talking about sacrificing security to get the job done, I'll tell you, I've been to many, many companies, consulted for many more companies that say, you know what, Gene, our CEO just came down the hall and said he wants to use his personal iPad to connect to our network. And we really don't have a way to manage that. We can't make sure it's patched. We can't block bad traffic to it or from it. But he's the CEO, and we really got to give him what he wants. And those kinds of things happen. Or our developers are such an artistic breed of people that they want to use their own devices to do development. And we don't have a mobile device management solution, so we're just going to let them do it. And those are the kind of things that we're talking about when we talk about people sacrificing security to get the job done or to make the boss happy or to go from there. So sorry to jump in on there, Tom, but I wanted to make sure people understood the kind of things we were talking about.
Yeah, by all means. Thank you, Gene. Next slide, please. So here we have another poll question. We would like to ask you, how many of your customer service agents are working remotely? So is it less than 25%? Is it 25 to 50%? Or 50 to 100%? Or none if you have all of your customer service agents back in the office full time? So I'll give you a few 20 seconds or so here to punch in a response, and we'll see what the results show. All right. So we can see here that 80% of the respondents mentioned that at least half of their customer service representatives are working remotely. Still, at this point of the pandemic, even though we're about a year and a half into it, many of these agents that started working remotely did really enjoy it, and that sometimes it's difficult because it might be a perk that they would like to keep up. But at the same time, with the security concerns that we just listed over the past few slides, it's not always the best idea, if it's at all avoidable or, of course, safe for them to be in that work environment. It is surprising here that nobody chose less than 25%, like a hybrid approach would indicate. So next slide, please.
So we talked
I'm going to
about,
pass this off.
yeah, we talked at a very high level about some of the things that companies aren't doing. And now let's talk about some of the things that companies can do. Now, I'll caution you, I've done 3-hour-long lectures on these things about what the right security measures are. I've been told to keep it very brief here and talk about some basics. So we'll do that. One of the things that I think is fundamental to any security program is what we're going to call threat intelligence. Now, let me give you an example. Back in the days when everybody was in the office and, Bob brought in cake and there's cake in the break room and everybody knew there was cake in the break room except you. Didn't you feel left out that you were the last one to learn that there was cake in the break room? And that's kind of the way this threat intelligence thing works. When we're talking about threat intelligence, we know that what we call the threat landscape out there is always changing. There's always a new way to break in. There's always a new vulnerability out there. There's always something new that the bad guys are coming up with. And the only way that you can successfully defend against these things is to get out in front of them, to know about them while and before everybody else does. And what a progressive company is going to do is going to leverage threat intelligence from many, many different sources. I mean, I'm sure many people on this call are members of FS-ISAC, the Financial Services ISAC. At our company, we have a threat intelligence program that's tied into not just that, it's tied into the FBI InfraGuard, which is a background checked members only type situation. There's the United States CERT, Computer Incident Response Team, and many, many others that are in the business of doing advanced reconnaissance and finding out where these threats are, what they are, and feeding information to you. I'll tell you, there have been a lot of attacks and even breaches of some companies over the last year that, fortunately we were able to get out in front of because we have threat intelligence. And in many of those cases, we've been able to remediate the issues or stop the threats because we got advance word before the bad guys even got out. And then we sit back 6 hours, 8 hours later and listen to how other companies that didn't leverage threat intelligence ended up being victims to that. So, it's a lot of words to talk about the fact that the way to stay ahead of this game is to be able to understand what threats are happening. We liken it a little bit to, you go out in the woods with a bunch of guys and a bear shows up, you only have to run faster than the slowest guy. And it's that kind of a thing. So leveraging that threat intelligence, coming up with good, credible sources, having processes in place to know how to respond to those, quickly being able to respond to a threat that comes out that may impact a lot of the systems and computers and people in your environment. That's one of the main keys to staying ahead. And as far as I'm concerned, it's one of the primary things that companies can do to make sure that they have an effective program. Okay.
All right. So here we see that it's important that clients use PCI compliant methods when accepting agent assisted payments. So If you recall a few slides ago, we had a statistic that showed that 72% of agents have had customers' card numbers read to them over the phone. Well, especially in a remote environment where it's even more difficult to control that environment, it's more difficult to control that phone line, maybe record it. This becomes a big problem, but thankfully here at ACI, we have a solution for this. So we call this Agent Card Assist Plus, and the way it works is shown here on the screen. So a customer would make a phone call into the call center to make a payment and get connected with an agent. While on the phone with that agent, the customer would indicate that they would like to make a payment using a new payment method that is not already saved onto their account. And at this time, the agent will click a button on their screen that creates a secure connection between the agent's soft phone as well as the customer's line on that phone call. When this occurs, that phone call is now encrypted, and we will intercept the tones that come through the wire as the customer punches in their card number on their phone's keypad. So here they're not speaking their card number, they're typing it into their keypad. And in the case that an agent might have some sort of mechanism to, maybe record the dial tones that they're hearing and try and decipher those later, that wouldn't work, because here we make sure to have every tone that comes across the wire on the agent's side be monotone. So every tone is the exact same sound. They have no way of extracting the card number out of it. And while the customer is punching in their card number, their CVV, and their expiration date using their phone's keypad, the agent can see that customer's progress with masked text showing up on the screen, so they won't see the actual digits either. Once this part of the phone call is complete, where the agent has verified the customer has entered everything, they then can save that payment method, and they can then release that encrypted part of the call, allowing that agent to then go submit the payment for the customer. Next slide, please. So here we also talk about additional authentication methods. So we asked our respondents, what kind of authentication can companies incorporate to make you feel more secure in utilizing mobile and digital platforms? So here we see that multi-factor authentication, you'll sometimes hear it referred to or abbreviated as MFA. This was the strongest response at 56%. And this is a good thing because of the options that are listed here, we do think that this is the most secure. That would be an example of that would be I try to make a payment with one of my cards. Maybe my bank would send me an immediate email where I have to tap on a link in the email to approve that payment. Or even more common, I try to log into a website, they send me a text message with a 6-digit code. Many banks use this 6-digit code via text message kind of approach today, and that's what MFA is. Below that, you'll see passcode, and I do want to be careful here. There is a difference between a passcode and a passphrase. So passcodes are typically shorter in length. So think about, your iPhone or your Android phone. Maybe you have a 4 to 6 digit passcode on there. Whereas, if you were taking a more secure approach, you might enable an alphanumeric kind of password to enter your phone and have it be a little bit longer. And that would be what we call a passphrase. It could be a short phrase, and that length there increases or decreases the likelihood that it could be brute forced in the future. Below that, we have fingerprint and facial recognition. So the common biometrics that many of us use to log into our smartphones many times per day. And then at the bottom, there is voice recognition. And I can attest to this one myself because when I think about my Amazon Alexa or my Google Home that I have in my home, although they are incredibly powerful at understanding what I'm asking for and doing that natural language processing, I personally don't know how much I trust that device's ability to tell my voice apart from someone else in my family that might sound substantially similar to me. So that's why you saw that down there towards the bottom. Next slide, please. So here we asked our respondents, do you believe companies properly educate consumers on how they keep data secure? And here you see that in 2020, 33% of our respondents did feel that companies did a good job of that. And that has dropped down to 29% in 2021. So a similar about 4% drop to another question that we had earlier in the presentation today. When you break that down by age, you see that the younger generations have responded to this in the affirmative a little bit more strongly than the older generations have. And again, I'll go back to what I mentioned earlier, where I think that sometimes when companies try to educate consumers on keeping data secure, they sometimes get a little bit too technical about it. And so these, the younger people that might be a little bit more tech savvy might be able to pick up on that communication a little bit more easily, will benefit from it more so than some of the older generations that aren't used to, all of these new changing technologies, or haven't been using them since their day of inception when they all were first released. Next slide, please. So when we think about payment security 101, what we've gone over with you over the past few slides here, and I'll ask Gene to add some color to this after I go through these points here. But we highly recommend that you remind your customers to use mobile wallets for additional authentication. So this can be the mobile wallets in their phones. This can also be them saving tokenized funding information on your payment sites. Also, if you're unsure about an email you received, maybe a text message you received about an account you have that has a bill due, simply go to your lender's website manually if you're unsure. Don't click the link, just go to the source yourself, and you'll quickly be able to tell if what you found was, or if what you received was actually, potentially a scammer or a phisher or not. Also, as Gene mentioned earlier, it's extremely important that we reset passwords on a regular basis and use a password manager. Many websites that I use, I can agree with Gene here, do not force me to change my passwords on a regular basis. And so many of us have so many passwords to deal with that's why you really need to be using a password manager if you want to rotate those passwords effectively over time. We need to keep account information out of the mailbox by turning off paper and going digital. So this, of course, helps the environment. It's also inherently more secure because somebody walking down the street can't just open up your mailbox and then have all of your financial info in their hands. And then lastly here, keep an eye out for phishing emails and text messages. A lot of times phishing emails that you will receive, it's pretty easy to tell that they're a phishing email unless it's very well made. Some common giveaways are that there's misspellings, grammatical mistakes throughout the body of the email. Often there will be grammatical mistakes in the subject line. And also many times you will see that if you see the from address on that email, that it will be some domain that has nothing to do with or is not associated with the actual entity that they're claiming to be sending from. So Gene, anything that you would like to add to that?
Yeah, Tom, thanks. I'd like to just add some color to a couple of these if I could. So, that second bullet talks about using the vendor's website if you're unsure. We're not only talking about not clicking on something in an email message. I'll share with you an example of something that allowed a breach of a company that I was doing an investigation for. People were not used to going to specific links of a website. And what they would do is go to Google or whatever their search engine was and type in, I'll use me as an example, type in Gene's Federal Credit Union. And then the link that would come up on the Google or whatever search, they would click on that and then begin to log in. Well, I'll tell you, the bad guys learned real quickly that they can buy sponsored pages that the search engines will point to. And if I was a really crafty bad guy, I might stand up a web page that looks like Gene's Federal Credit Union, seed that into Google so that it's the first search result that comes up. When you click on it, I ask you for your ID and your password, which is what you would expect. But it's not really Gene's Federal Credit Union. It's me as a bad guy collecting your information. And, I'll immediately either sell it or use it to go in and empty your account. And by the time you realize what's happened and you get Google to pull it down, I've already made my money and you're gone. So we caution people a lot, and I have to do this within my own household, quite frankly. We caution people a lot to not just do a search and click on a link that you find. Bookmark the legitimate site, go directly to your bank or your financial institution from your browser. Don't rely on search results, and definitely on messages to do that. The other thing I want to call out is, again, I've been doing this for a very, very long time. I've investigated these for intelligence agencies, for companies, And I will tell you unequivocally, without a shadow of a doubt, the main reason that many companies are hacked are because of phishing emails. And you know, I talk about this a lot. I lecture on this a lot. And if you think about it, the bad guys love phishing because it's very easy to do and it's almost impossible to get caught. And it only takes one person at a company to click on that link and provide that information to potentially compromise the company. So, you know, companies need to focus the majority of their effort, if they have to put it anywhere, on making sure that employees are smart about phishing messages. And you know, we may talk about that again later. But again, just wanted to call out those two particular points and why they're so critical to not only protecting your personal data, but if you're involved in a company or a payment organization, being able to protect customer data as well. And at this point, we will, between Tom and I, but predominantly Tom, we'll talk to you a little bit about ACI and how we do some of the things that, that we've talked about here today.
Sorry about that, I was muted. So thanks, Gene. I'll kick this part off and then turn it back to you for some more color again. ACI by the numbers, we have over 5,000 customers in the Americas, 450 in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, and about 250 in Asia Pacific. So we have customers all over the globe, and we service many end customers, many hundreds of millions, if not billions of end customers around the world as well. We support 19 of the top 20 banks worldwide. We have fraud solutions for over 1,500 banks, intermediaries, and merchants. And then also, the part of the business I work in, our biller division, we support thousands of billers, as well as 80,000 merchants directly through payment service providers. I'll go a little bit more into the biller piece on the next slide, but Gene, any other pieces here you'd like to add?
No, I'd just like to add that you know, one metric that I always enjoy when I'm at parties and conferences and stuff, and I don't see it on here, and it helps people understand just what a powerful processing engine can do. We process $14 trillion a day. That's trillion with a T, $14 trillion a day in payments. So as you can imagine, with the multitude of applications that ACI has, with the multitude of hosted, you know, solutions that we have, we spend a significant amount of our time making sure that we're doing that properly, that we're doing it correctly, that we're doing it securely, quite frankly.
That's right. Thank you, Gene. I mentioned that, you know, I personally work on the biller side of ACI, and that's what this slide here is speaking to. Also, going back to what Gene just mentioned about the fact that we move, you know, on average $14 trillion per day, we're moving an enormous amount of money, and to do that, we of course have to be secure. We pass our PCI security every year. We have extremely stringent security protocols that we have for all of our employees here at ACI. And that's what allows us to build that trust with our client base and their end customers. On the biller side of the house, we support over 5,000 billers here in the United States. That does make us the #1 largest direct bill pay provider in the US. And when you break that down into a few different verticals or segments, we support 3 of the top 10 electric providers, half of the top 10 credit card issuers, 6 of the top 10 auto lenders, and we do all this while having 24/7 or 24/7 by 365 full-time monitoring and support of our systems to ensure maximum uptime so that we can take payments from any customer anytime that we need to. We have over 40 million cloud-based transactions processed daily in ACI data centers, and we process over 500 million bill pay transactions annually. And all the numbers that you see here, again, this is just the bill pay side of ACI. This doesn't even touch on the merchant or banks and intermediaries piece. We're, you know, very seasoned veterans at what we do here. Our clients trust us to do all the security that I mentioned. And if you have any questions, I encourage you to ask away. So next slide, please. Here we go.
Thank you so much, Tom and Gene. We have a few questions. The first one's going to be for Tom. With agent-assisted payments, what happens during recorded calls?
Good question. So this goes back to what I mentioned earlier, where we're able to create that encrypted call session between the agent's soft phone as well as the end customer. So on the recording of those calls, the recording would simply have the monotone sounds as the customer is punching in those values for their card number, CVV, and expiration date.
Thank you, Tom. This question is going to be for Gene. We've had issues with employees clicking on phishing emails. What can we do about it?
Well, I'm excited. I was hoping somebody would ask that question. So, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, phishing is without a doubt the primary attack vector that people use. And as I also mentioned earlier, it only takes one person to click on that link or to fill in that information to compromise the company. And the primary defense against that is education. But let's be honest, we all kind of ignore those emails that come in that say, hey, don't click on the link, and your security team or your risk team sends out something that says, here are the dangers of phishing, and you're busy and you don't pay attention to it. And because this is such a prevalent attack vector, because it is such a problem, sometimes you have to take action. Now, let me describe to you what we've decided to do at ACI and why. We kept metrics on phishing, and we conducted phishing testing of our employees to figure out just how bad the problem was. And I'm a little disappointed to announce that several years ago when we did this, many more employees than we hoped for were clicking on the links in the testing phishing messages. And we did that for a while, and we kept track of the stats, and we realized we really have to find a way to bring this down. So we introduced more education, we formalized some policies, and ultimately what we did was put in place a program and a policy that has consequences for failing phishing tests. So at our company at ACI, every employee in the company, to include our executive leadership team, and quite frankly, to include our board of directors members, every individual associated with the company is phishing tested at least once per quarter, so 4 times per year. Okay. And we have a policy now that says that if over the course of that year you fail 3 of those phishing tests, there are consequences that may in fact include termination of the employee. Now, we don't want to terminate anybody, but the fact of the matter is those that habitually click on phishing links are such a significant risk to the company that oftentimes you have no choice. And I'll tell you, not only did the consequences bring the click rates down significantly, but it also has helped people to become more aware. And we have a place that you can send suspected phishing messages to have them analyzed. We use that to do some analysis. If we see several of those in the same day, we know that there's a phishing campaign going on, and we'll work with our email teams to block them. But I'm pretty proud of our program. People think it's barbaric because of the potential consequences, but I'll tell you, it has worked. We have met our targets and our goals of bringing down the number of people that click and increasing the number of people that report the messages. And I would encourage people to consider something like that if you're having problems with phishing being extremely prevalent at your company. So.
Great, thank you, Gene. Looks like that's it for questions. So just want to thank Tom, Gene, Tessa, and ACI. Just remember the slides and recording of today's webinar will be available on ACTA's website in the Webinar Resource Center. Tom and Gene, if you have any concluding statements, feel free to make them.
No, I'd just like to say, thank you, Marcy, for pulling us together here and for kind of orchestrating this. As you continue your venture through your daily jobs, just be cognizant of the fact that information is of significant value today, and you want to make sure that whoever you're doing business with, that it's a company or an organization that, number one, takes it seriously, and number two, has processes, controls, and in many cases certifications in place to help you identify that they're doing things right.
Thank you. And yeah, so I echo everything that Gene just said. And I also personally wanted to thank my colleagues here on the ACI side, as well as our friends over at AFSA for helping put on this webinar today. So thank you.
Great, thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.